As Super Sentai ends and Project Red takes its place, I started thinking about why these transforming hero shows work at all. Kamen Rider is the most successful of the big three in terms of toy sales, so it is the best place to start. Kamen Rider resets every year. New suits, new tones, new worlds. And yet, somehow, it is still instantly recognizable. That got me thinking, why do you watch Kamen Rider? Strip away the stories and emotions, and there are a few external elements that never change. The first thing is that transformation is always a spectacle. We get from Yusuke Godai, behold my transformation. We get the jingles of the more modern Kamen Riders. That's, Kuga was 20 years ago. We have from the original Kamen Rider the way that the transformation went from being on a motorcycle. We have these sharp, fast cuts going back and forth between Takeshi Hongo showing his normal face, then showing the mask on him, off him, on him, off him, until finally the mask settles there and his scarf blows out dramatically, and we eventually got some flashing lights added to that. And then after he was away for a little bit, when Ichimoji Hayato showed up as Rider 2, we had the full development of the Henshin sequence for Kamen Rider. And it became something over time that was always there, but it was sharpened when he came along, because it was no longer that he just rode his bike fast to get the wind turbine to spin up to transform. It was something else. It turned into a ritual as opposed to a process. It's still kind of a process, especially when you add on the jingles of the more modern Kamen Rider shows, but still, there's that spectacle that leads to the transformation that happens when the hero is ready, when he needs to transform, when the enemies are too many for him, or whatever the situation is, when it's too dire, then he stops fighting from his civilian form and then goes and transforms, and then things get kicked up another notch. Speaking of the enemies, another big staple of Kamen Rider, something that pulls people in, is the enemy origin power. It isn't always obvious at a glance how the Kamen Rider and the enemy are linked to each other, but if you just watch an episode, basically any episode, even if he's fighting mooks or a lower level monster of the week as opposed to a general, you can see there's shared DNA between him and the other group, and the enemy that he's fighting. And I think there's something fascinating about that dichotomy. I don't know necessarily that we're processing that on a conscious level when we see it, but I think there's something about the fact that if you go back to the original Kamen Rider, he's wearing boots and gloves and a belt and a mask with armor pieces on him, and all the shocker mooks that he's fighting have masks and war paint, and boots and gloves as well as these belts, and they're coming at him. And then you look at the first one was Spider-Man. He's got his big shocker belt and his crazy spider helmet, and he had hairy fingers and stuff, so that's a little bit off, but then his boots are the same, and you can see that they're these more powerful shocker cyborgs. And you know from the first episode of the original Kamen Rider that he is a shocker cyborg who's turned against them and who's betrayed them and gone good. But I'm thinking about other shows. You can tell, like O's, for example, the enemies there have a very bold design. It's very monstrous, and O's is much more refined, and yet you can see that it's obvious that the metals come out of the enemies when he defeats them, and before that, the Yummies have metals that come out of them as well, and he's using the metals directly, so you can see, okay, metal to metal connection. Also, while he's not monstrous, he's odd looking, and he has very evidently on his body these different animal motifs. So when he's fighting I think it was the praying mantis in the first episode, you can see he's using Tatobot. He's got the grasshopper, the tiger, and what was the other one? Oh, and the hawk. He's got those, animal motifs on him, and you can see clearly, okay, so he's got these animal power coins, and the enemy is using them as well, and you can see the connection. And I believe all of the enemies always have some sort of flashy belt buckle type of deal. In Zets currently, it's like a sleepy eye kind of deal. That's just a simple belt buckle, which looks really good. They did something very similar for Kamen Rider Ghost, and I'm not going to remember all the rest of them off the top of my head, but just looking at it, you can see, okay, there is something central. There's something unifying between his design and their designs, and why is he fighting them? I think that kind of fuels a mystery, even if it's not like on a deep, like psychological level or anything like that. It's on the surface, but it kind of makes it more interesting. It makes you ask a question. In writing books, there's something that you want to do, which is that you want to write an invisible question. You want to state things, set up the scenario of the world in the first, on the first page, in the first chapter, in the first paragraph, if you can. That makes people ask questions or realize that there's a question there that needs to be asked that isn't being spelled out. So, which is, in this case, would be, why does this hero look like these villains? Why does this monster, why is this monster being opposed by somebody who looks kind of like him, but who I can tell is protecting people and helping them instead of hurting them? Another thing is the iconic Rider mask with the big bug eyes, and whether it's Tatoba, which is a hawk that somehow has bug eyes, or it's Ryuki, who has these big eyes behind a grill. And then actually, if you look at Ryuki more closely, the antennae, the big eyes, the bug eyes, and the crusher are divided between three heroes. So it's Ryuki, whatever the Bat Knight is called, and then I think it's Zolda, who has he's the green one with the Tauros. He has the big antennae. The Bat Knight has the crusher, and Ryuki himself, the Dragon Knight, has the eyes hidden behind the visor. And I think he's a tiny little antenna too. But anyway, that's just another example of that. But there's always these big eyes, whether they're compound eyes or not, which I think they're pretty much always compound eyes. They're large and distinct, and that's part of the icon. And I think it always looks distinct, except for with Jay and Zeto, of course, because they almost look like twins, and Rider 1 and 2. But there's a uniting element, which is they're these big eyes, so they're kind of emotional. They kind of look like skull eyes. Sometimes they have tears under them, sometimes they don't, depending on the writer, the season, the design that they went for that year. But that's always something that's kind of there, and it makes it distinct. He's the Karate Bugman, Kamen Rider. Which one? All of them. They're all the Karate Bugman, even if they're not bugs, which is funny. Finally, the Rider is always framed as being alone in some way. With Takeshi Hongo, it's because he was a cyborg. He was no longer human, and he was sad that his humanity was gone, and he didn't know how he could relate to people no longer being human, and it separated him from other people. In Kamen Rider Ghost, he's dead. In Kamen Rider Gov, he was a half human, half monster, just like in Kiva. And in Zets, we don't really know how he's separate, but he is alone. He's the lone agent, even though there's complications with Nox, and are there even other agents beyond that? He's Agent 7, so that implies there's 1 through 6 at least, if not people above him as well. And there's Zero, obviously, who's not a writer, but he's a support member for him. And just because the Kamen Rider has friends, thinking back to Minami Kotaro and Kamen Rider Black, he had the sister and half-sister, cousin, friend, whatever, these two girls that he hung out with a lot, and he was friendly with people, but he was always off alone. He was always looking for Nobuhiko. He was always facing Golgum by himself because he had to, because that's what a writer has to do. They have to be able to fight on their own. They have to face the enemy by themselves. They're the only ones who can do it. They are uniquely positioned to deal with the threat that is there, and they're altered in a way that makes them feel alone and isolated. Even if they have friends, they have to kind of hide part of who they are from these friends, these allies. And it's interesting. It's not to say that there aren't teams and there's ensembles and things like that, but still, the writers, being a writer, is something that's singular and solitary, even if you're part of a team. And it's much less like a Super Sentai, even a little bit more like an Ultraman, which is interesting. But I think it's something that people can pretty much always see straight on, picking up any episode of a Kamen Rider show. And also, the writers typically have conflict when there's more than one of them, which I think sharpens that even more. So it's like, yeah, well, you guys are obviously writers, but you're not working together necessarily. So even when there's a team, or when there's multiples of them, and they're not on a team, they're on opposite sides, it helps to reinforce that lone aspect of Kamen Rider that you feel. And that is a big staple of it. And of course, most Kamen Riders have close-range physical combat, which is exciting to watch. They're brawling, they're guerrilla getting there, even when they have powers, like the more modern ones. It still typically results in them going over and punching or kicking or hitting or throwing or whatever an enemy, which is just fun to watch. But it's more distinctive, in Super Sentai, they have a lot of range slashes, even sword slashes that fly towards the enemy. And in Ultraman, you have all the beam attacks as well. And I would say Kamen Rider is much more physically grounded in as actual physical combat, even if there are swords and guns and things like that. But still, for the most part, he's getting in there grappling and throwing punches and things like that, which is fun to see. And I think it's definitely a staple across Kamen Rider. Then you have things, outliers like Amazon, where he's cutting enemies in half. And like the original Kamen Rider, he has no weapons. He is the weapon, and it's fun to see him getting in and mixing with the Shocker combatmen, and he's stealing their weapons from them and using them against them even. But then he throws them away and he just fights, with his fists and his feet, which is always fun to see. So those are definitely distinctive elements of Kamen Rider that I think draw people in year after year. Kamen Rider is sustained because people keep watching it. New members of the fandom come in, and they can't enjoy it if they can't become fans of it and watchers of it, viewers of it, if they're not seeing it. And I think these things are the things that pull them in. Let's see. Am I missing anything? Can you think of anything that's like a core staple or core element of Kamen Rider that we always get? A reason why you watch Kamen Rider? And also, what keeps people coming back is a different question. And that's something that I'll talk about later because I think that needs to be explored as well. If you want to go deeper, check the pinned comment for more of my analysis. This is MJ with Henshin Reflection and Rider Tears, signing out.